I put a Smith machine on my Rogue Monster power rack, and here it is on Reps PR 5000, but it can fit on quite a few other racks as well. This version is using one of my own bars I clamped into it, but you can buy it with a bar included like we've got here. Oh, and it can be set to travel straight up and down or even angled. Bells of Steel's Smith rack attachment has a lot going for it, and there's quite a few ways to configure these. Inside the rack, outside, it'll fit on 5/8 and 1-inch racks. It won't fit on everything, it's not perfect, and there's gonna be a lot to dissect with this one, so ignore my awkward setups here with the Bulletproof Fitness VTS kind of sandwiched behind everything. That review's coming too, but our Patreons asked us to put this on Rogues and Reps racks in our behind the scenes video, and since Bells themselves said the bar included version wouldn't fit on a 47-inch rack, you know I had to try. If any of the items we talk about interest you, I've linked them in the description. And if you click that link and buy something, we may get a small commission, which is how we keep this channel going, because even though Bells sent me these for the review, I paid for the racks they're sitting on. We're gonna get to the compatibility, break down the differences between the versions, and make some comparisons, but first, let's address the elephant in the room. Why get a Smith machine? I know a few keyboard warriors clicked this video all geared up to teach me how much better they are than me because I'm talking about Smith machines, but I don't think anybody's suggesting a Smith machine is the end-all be-all. They, like other training tools, have their pros and cons. For many exercises, I prefer using a barbell and dumbbells. The path they travel is much more natural, and for something like incline pressing, I only use dumbbells because the freedom they allow in the movement is much gentler on my joints rather than the fixed path of a Smith machine. The problem is, we often forget that years ago, none of this was natural to us. There's a learning curve to any style of training. You're not barbell squatting the same exact way you would Smith squat. And yes, the free motion of a barbell requires more stability, which is going to better transfer into functional strength, but we can't think so one-dimensionally. Smith movements can be great for isolation and hypertrophy work because they don't require the stabilization and balance a barbell does. So for someone like me, they're another good tool to have. They're also beginner friendly. You can do so much on a Smith machine, and I love working out in my home gym. I never get bored because I've got so much variety. So sure, internet comment guy, you can get jacked with just an old tree trunk in your backyard, but Smiths have their place. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the options, what these will fit on, and the ways to build them. There are two separate variations of Bell's Smith machine, the BYOB, that lets you put your own barbell into it, and the bar included version. The BYOB is this one right here that I've bolted onto my Rogue Monster rack. On my PR 5000 is the one that comes with a lighter weight hollow bar. Both versions are $800 shipped and have their own advantages and disadvantages that we'll cover. To put that price in perspective, the VTS is close to $1,000 shipped, and if you're adding on optional accessories like the feather bar, the ISO handles, and the weight horns like we have, that price really starts to soar. Of course, Bulletproof also has the VTS Lite as well, which is their lighter weight, not quite as versatile and a little more economical version of the VTS, but at almost $700 shipped, the price of that and Bells aren't really that far off. We've been working on our review of both versions of the VTS for a while as we've been testing the various builds and accessories our Patreons have asked us about, but as tends to be the case, there's trade-offs between the options. So I'll do my best to cover as many as I can in this video, but if you've got things you want to see or want answered in that VTS review, then let us know. Also realize if you're willing to wait, and you may be waiting many months, if not years, but with companies like Rep, Fringe, and others working on their own Smith attachments, our options are only going to grow. An advantage Bells will have over many of those upcoming options is they built these to fit on racks besides their own, which is important because if you're waiting for Rogue to release a Smith attachment for their racks, you'll probably be dead and gone by the time it comes out. Bell's has created quite a few ways to help you figure out if either version will fit on your rack, by providing measurements, making a nifty little compatibility chart, and they even have a bracket printout you can use to check your rack, but they don't have a bunch of competitors' racks lying around, so how would they know you can actually fit the bar included version on a 47-inch rep rack? Only a really cool guy that you should subscribe to encourage that type of obsessive behavior would check those things. That's not me saying it'll fit on every possible configuration. So please don't be that guy who sends me a 6-page email asking if it'll fit on your obscure imported Alibaba rack that you swear is the same thing as Reps. But Bell's has designed this to fit on most 3x3 racks with 5/8 or 1-inch holes, hence my Rep and Rogue builds. The limiting factor here is the height, with the Smith being about 70 inches tall, though with the brackets installed, Bell's recommends a minimum rack height of 72 inches. The width of the Smith is about 2.3 inches or 60 millimeters, so you can fit this on racks with that tubing size, like Bell's light commercial rack. Bell's didn't think the version with the bar included would fit on a 47-inch wide rack like Reps because the bar itself is about 42 inches wide and you need space for the bar to be able to rotate so you can lock it onto the catches. You know, so you don't die while using it. In fairness to Bell's, they're not going to say it works without testing it, but I know a thing or two about making things fit where they shouldn't. To get it to work, I just swapped the included spacers to the inside so the bar has enough space to rotate. That width limitation doesn't really apply to the BYOB version. You can just clamp in anywhere along the shaft of your bar. As long as you've got about 10 inches of space, which is the depth of this attachment, you can pretty much put this wherever you want. On the inside or outside of the rack, on the front or back of an upright, attach it to the cross members, angled, vertical, whatever. So yes, my current Rep Rogue builds don't make a ton of sense. I'm consuming an entire upright as I have them right now, but this was just to test compatibility. Since they bolt onto the rack pretty easily and aren't that hard to move once installed, I'll experiment a little with them, and I may just throw one on my Manacore rack and build a Colossus for our Kraken review. Both the BYOB and bar-included Smiths are basically functionally identical. What you can do on one, you can do on the other. But there are some important differences between them besides the fact that one lets you use your own bar. They're sharing a lot of the same components, so they've got the same capabilities and same 600-pound weight capacity, which does limit me on curls. I'm kidding. Nobody curls on a Smith machine. I prefer the BYOB over the bar-included version because I can strap any bar with a shaft diameter between 25 and 30 millimeters into it, but my preference carries a few caveats. Since the trolley that you clamp your bar into weighs around 17 pounds and neither of these are counterbalanced, the starting weight will be higher on the BYOB. The bar-included version, which comes with a hollow barbell, weighs 38 pounds. The BYOB, with a 45-pound bar, like we've got here, would start at 62 pounds, which may limit some people on certain exercises. You could, of course, strap a technique bar or lighter barbell into here. You would just have to pay attention to the width of the bar between the collars. You also probably won't be swapping your bars very often, if at all, with the BYOB. I'm not going to say it's difficult, it's just clunky, and especially at first, not very intuitive. Here's how it works. To clamp your bar down, you have to set a few screws based on pretty specific measurements, and since I'm American and don't believe in the metric system, I didn't have a metric ruler with me and wasn't going to use the paper one that Bell's included, so I used my calipers instead, but you don't have to be as OCD as me. Once the screws are set, you just drop the bar and clamps into place and tighten down some screws to lock the bar in, and you shouldn't have to touch it again. I beat on mine quite a bit to see if anything would move, and nothing has. If it looks complicated, admittedly, it's not the simplest, but the VTS makes the BYOB look simple as you're dialing in 4 sets of rollers for each side, and depending which version you have, you might have to pull off your upright to slide it on. You do have to be somewhat precise to make sure that your bar rotates smoothly and so you don't end up with some lateral deflection or sway. My BYOB is dialed in, so this is pretty minimal. I mention that because on the VTS Lite, although I haven't had any issues during use, there is a lot more sway. With the BYOB, I don't notice movement and haven't had any issues during exercises, and I've used this for dozens of movements. Neither version has seized or bound up on me, and I feel safe using them, but I think it's only fair I mention it took some effort for me to dial this in for the first time. Once it's locked in though, it's very good. That's where the bar included version has an advantage. You bolt that thing together and you're good to go. There's no movement to the bar, nothing to dial in, everything just works, and the whole thing is super smooth. That's not to say the BYOB isn't smooth. They feel very similar when you're using them and perform like a traditional Smith machine. The bar glides very easily and smoothly because the linear bearings Bell's is using are great. If I could nitpick, and I can because that's my entire personality, I'd say I wish the bar safety latches on the BYOB version had UHMW and that they used rollers rather than bearings so it was gentler on my bar. But if you're not some prissy YouTuber who collects gym equipment rather than using it, you'll be fine. The fact that you can strap pretty much any bar you want onto this is beyond cool, and it's an advantage over the bar included variation because admittedly the bar on that one isn't great. It's a hollow bar, which is how they keep the weight down, but that also means it's a thick boy with its 35mm shaft diameter, which makes it a little harder to grip if you're doing a lot of heavy pulls. Also, since it's a hollow bar, there's really only so much they can do with the knurling. It ends up being fairly passive, which is fine. You don't need an aggressive knurl on a Smith machine as the bar is locked in place, but the knurling terminations are sloppy and the bright chrome finish is more of a budget level coating. It's fine at this price level. I've seen barbells that cost more than the entire attachment, and I think the build quality overall is good on both versions. The real question is whether these are right for you. As I mentioned, there's always trade-offs. Bell's Smiths remind me of what you'd find in a commercial gym. I'm not saying they're that level, but they are solid. While Bell's units are very versatile, Smith machines in general are, the VTS with their ISO handles is going to be the more versatile of the two. But with Bell's prototyping their own unilateral system, that difference might not be as far apart as it seems. There's two limitations I see for some people with Bell's. The first is the range of motion, although that's something that tends to be easy to overcome. For pulls, like with many Smith machines, you may have to stand on something if this doesn't go low enough for you. Also, since the attachment is only about 70 inches tall, you'll be limited with overhead exercises, but to overcome that, I just tend to do them seated. The other limitation really depends on your rack configuration. Again, remembering this is just a temporary setup to show they fit on these racks, but clearly the Smiths are in the way of my uprights on my Rep Aries and Rogue FM twin stacks, so it's not ideal as I've got them. Of course, you can put them on the inside or outside of any set of uprights, but even if I move them, they'll affect the range of motion of my trolleys on these two racks. On many other setups, they'll work great. That's because you only need about 10 inches of depth for them to fit on your rack. They can also be bolted to your cross members. You don't need to use your uprights, but the height may be a factor, and I'm not going to move my cross members down. If they were more modular, meaning if the rod and the Smith upright came in different heights, then you could just bolt them to your cross members regardless of the height of your rack. Then I'd just install mine right here behind the trolleys and they'd integrate perfectly and I'd have debatably built the ultimate all-in-one. As is, they're still good, you just have to make sure they fit your rack configuration. Let me know what you think. How'd Bell's do on this one? Thank you so much to our Patreons for their support and for their feedback and configuration questions, and thanks for watching.